Rupert Harcourt. Chilling tales, paranormal encounters, every story leaves a mark.
Every covered mirror in the ward showed a bed that had been removed years before, and someone was breathing under its sheet. Hello guys. Tonight's story is the Mirror Ward at St. Alm's, a quiet account from a place that should have been ordinary, and from a man who went there with a practical job to do. Settle in, keep the lights low if you want to, and if you enjoy these stories, comment and subscribe. My name was Mara Keane on the rota, though most people in St. Anselm only knew me by the keys on my belt. I worked as a records assistant, sent to digitize closed hospital files, the sort of work that leaves you alone with buildings after everyone else has gone home. That was the arrangement at St. Anselm's Annex, a decommissioned hospital ward, awaiting redevelopment with too much paperwork, too many locked doors, and a reputation no one wanted to say out loud. It was not haunted in the way children say, places are haunted. It had invoices, damp patches, a staff kitchenette, and fire doors with peeling blue labels. That made it worse, because every wrong thing had somewhere normal to hide. I took the contract in the first week of February, when the heating failed because the money was better than it should have been. The manager who handed me the folder did not act frightened. He acted embarrassed. He said the building had personality, which is what people say when they do not want to put a complaint in writing. He also gave me one instruction in a tone that did not match the rest of the conversation. Never remove the cloths from the ward mirrors. On my first evening, nothing happened for almost 3 hours. I checked windows, logged meter readings, photographed a broken handle, and listened to the place settle around me. The sounds were the usual ones: pipes knocking softly, old boards lifting and relaxing, rain dragging itself across the roof in thin fingernails of water. I started to feel stupid for noticing every noise. I remember standing in the main corridor and telling myself that fear is often just attention with nowhere useful to go. Then paper rustled inside the drawer. It was not dramatic. It sounded like someone politely checking a document in the next room. I found the source in the records office. A folder lay open on a desk I had photographed earlier when it was definitely closed. The date at the top was from the first week of February when the heating failed, but the ink under it was wet enough to shine. The first page was a maintenance request about a discharge register that ended in the middle of a sentence. The second page was a list of names. Most had been crossed out with the same careful horizontal line. One name had not: Sister Lydia Rowe. I did not know that name then, and that made the way my stomach tightened feel unreasonable. I shut the folder, wrote the time in my log, and told myself that somebody had been in the building before I arrived. It was the only explanation that left me with any dignity. The next sign was small enough that I nearly missed it. I passed the staff board on the way back to reception and noticed the plastic name strip had been turned around. It had been blank an hour earlier. Now it showed my surname, typed in the same font as the old labels. Beside it was a shift time I had never agreed to: midnight until dawn. The corridor behind me seemed to lengthen in the reflection of the dark window. I stood there holding my torch, trying to decide whether to laugh or leave, and then the key turned in the lock. No hand touched the door. No person moved behind the glass. The lock simply obeyed someone I could not see. I should have left then. People always say that when they hear stories like this, and they are right in the simple moral sense, but real fear is rarely clean. You do not always run. Sometimes you start solving small problems, because solving them lets you pretend the larger problem has not arrived yet. I checked the exterior doors. I checked the alarm panel. I phoned the manager and got voicemail. I wrote "possible intruder" in the logbook because that sounded professional. The word ghost would have made me feel like a child. The word intruder let me keep moving. Instead, I made the first of several bad compromises. I decided I would finish the minimum inspection, leave through the nearest door, and never take another call from the agency. It sounds reasonable until you notice what it really means. I had allowed the building to set the terms of my departure. I no longer cared about doing the job properly. I cared about leaving in a way that made sense on paper. That is how places like St. Anselm's Annex keep you inside. They do not need chains at first. They only need your need to explain yourself. I went back to the records office because the folder was still on the desk, and because the practical part of my mind wanted proof. I photographed the list of names, the wet ink, the crossed out entries, and the line where Sister Lydia Rowe had been left untouched. My phone made the shutter sound, but the gallery did not save the images. Each attempt produced the same blank grey square, as if the camera had been pressed against cloth. On the fourth attempt, a thumbnail appeared for less than a second. It showed the room from behind me. I was bent over the desk, and a figure in a dark coat stood close enough to read over my shoulder. That was when the ordinary details began to turn cruel. The kettle in the staff room had boiled, though I had unplugged it. Steam rode a crooked line down the window. The clock over reception had lost its hands. The visitor badge tray contained a single badge with my name printed under the word, "Returning." In the toilet mirror, my face appeared a fraction late, catching up after I moved. None of those things by itself would have sounded believable. Together they made the building feel attentive, not alive exactly, but staffed by something patient and administrative. I tried to call someone again. The manager's number rang out. The agency line played hold music with no voice between loops. When I called emergency services, the phone connected to a woman who asked which department I required. Her accent was local but old-fashioned. The vowels clicked in a way I had only heard in archive recordings. I said police. She asked for my full name, date of birth, and reason for attendance. Then she asked whether I was calling from Myra Ward. I did not answer. She sighed softly, as if I had disappointed her, and said, "Then you are not ready to be released." There was a notice board near the staff entrance covered in routine reminders, fire drill dates, asbestos warnings, a laminated sheet about manual handling. Behind those papers, I found older notices pinned so deeply the metal heads had rusted into the cork. One referred to a discharge register that ended in the middle of a sentence. Another warned staff not to discuss noises from Mirror RWR ward with visitors. A third was a disciplinary memo about Sister Lydia Rowe, accused of answering the room after hours. That phrase stopped me harder than any screen could have. It implied the room asked questions. It implied someone had answered before. I read the memo 3 times, trying to pull a normal meaning out of it. The more I stared, the more the letters seemed to settle into fresh positions. Words thickened, thinned, and became something like a transcript. State your name. Confirm your witness. Identify the missing portion. Under that was a reply, written in a smaller hand. I do not know what part of me it took. I could feel that sentence working on me. It gave shape to the blank place in the photographs. It suggested that the people in them had not died there. They had left, incomplete, and spent the rest of their lives pretending the missing part did not matter. By then I had been inside for less than 4 hours, but my watch showed just after 3 in the morning. The date on my phone had advanced by a day. My hands were dirty, the way hands get after moving old furniture, though I had touched almost nothing. When I looked closely, the dirt was not dirt. It was black dust packed into the creases of my fingers, the same color as old typewriter ribbon. I wiped it on my trousers and left 5 neat fingerprints in a row, each one ending without a thumb. The worst moment before the sealed room was not a loud one. I found my own log entry again, but there were now extra pages after it. They described actions I had not taken yet. He returns to the corridor. He tests the door. He looks behind him, although he has been instructed not to. The handwriting matched mine when I am tired, slanted, impatient, letters crowding into each other near the margin. I stood there with the book open, trying not to read the next line. The next line read, "He reads the next line." That was when I understood the place was not predicting me. It was arranging me. At 11:30, the lights over the corridor dimmed one after another, not off, just down to a tired yellow that made the paint look nicotine-stained. The floor plan said the corridor ended at a storeroom. It did not. Past the storeroom was a turn I had not noticed, and beyond the turn was a narrow door with no fire label, no handle plate, and no reason to be there. Someone had written Myra Ward on it in pencil. The writing was not old. It had the powdery drag of a fresh mark. I lifted the torch, and the door gave a small wooden creak. I tried to draw the door on the floor plan with the blunt pencil from my pocket. The pencil snapped before it touched the paper. I tried again with a pen, and the ink ran clear, like water. That angered me in a small, useful way. Fear can make you freeze, but insult can move you. I took out a coin and scratched a mark into the plan instead. The moment the metal crossed the paper, a matching scratch appeared on the door in front of me, exactly where my hand had moved. The building was no longer hiding the connection. It was showing off. From the far side of the door came a soft administrative sound. Drawers opening, papers being squared, a stamp pressed into an ink pad. I could smell dust, wet wool, and the faint sweetness of flowers left too long in a vase. A rational part of my mind was still trying to build a route back to the yard. Another part was listening for a voice. It had suggested there was an answer inside, and people will walk toward terrible things if they think they can finally understand them. I said Sister Lydia Rowe's name once. I did not mean to. It left my mouth as a test, almost under my breath. Even the small settling sounds in the walls withdrew, as if the building were holding itself steady for a photograph. Then, 3 marks appeared in the pencil dust on the door, one beneath the other. My initials, the current date, and a little empty square where a face should have been. I understood then that the room did not want me to enter by force. It wanted me to recognize the paperwork. The handle was colder than metal should be indoors. When I gripped it, I had a memory that was not mine. Standing in that same corridor with different shoes, hearing someone beg from the other side, promising I would only look for a second. The memory carried no picture of a face, only the pressure of guilt and the smell of candle smoke. I pulled my hand away and found a black line across my palm, not a cut. More like carbon paper had marked me. It made a neat little box around the place where a lifeline should continue. The space behind the door was colder than the rest of the building. It held the kind of cold that feels deliberate, as if the air has been stored away for years and released only when someone deserves it. There were shelves on both sides, each lined with boxes, ledgers, old uniforms, keys, jars, photographs, whatever the place had decided not to throw away. On the far wall hung a mirror with brown spots under the glass. I could see myself in it only from the chest down. My head was missing from the reflection, replaced by the black square of the doorway behind me. I touched my face to make sure I was still there, and that was when a single glass clicked on the table. The sound came from a shelf of small evidence bags, each containing an ordinary object, a button, a bent coin, a pair of spectacles, a grey child's glove. One bag held a cracked patient wristband. The label was newer than the others. It had my initials on it. I took the bag down with 2 fingers, because touching it properly felt like accepting ownership. The object inside was dry, but my palm became wet as soon as I held it. Not sweat. Water. Dirty water, smelling faintly of iron and old plaster. In the mirror, below the blank place where my head should have been, another hand appeared over my shoulder. I turned around so fast my torch hit the shelf. There was no one in the room with me. The door had not moved. The corridor beyond it was empty. But the mirror still showed the hand. It was patient. It rested on my shoulder as if comforting a grieving relative. I watched the fingers tighten through my reflection and felt nothing on my actual body until the last second, when pressure arrived all at once. Not a squeeze. A claim. The torch beam dropped to the floor and rolled against the box marked with Sister Lydia Rowe's name. From inside the box, a whisper came from the vent. It said my name, but it said it the way a person reads a name from a form. Slow, uncertain, checking each syllable against whatever was written in front of it. That was the detail that made it unbearable. A monster would have known me. A hallucination would have sounded like my own thought. This sounded like a clerk at a counter I could not see, calling the next appointment. I backed into the shelf and knocked the box open. Inside were photographs of the same room, taken over decades. In each photograph, a different person stood where I was standing. Every one of them had their head missing from the image. The oldest photograph showed a man in a waistcoat holding a lantern. The newest showed a cleaner in a green tabard, the kind used by contractors in the early 2000s. Between them were night guards, nurses, a surveyor, a student, two police officers, and a woman with an expression so resigned that I knew she had understood something before the shutter clicked. On the back of her photograph was one sentence: "It only needs a witness to become a room." That sentence has stayed with me because it did not sound like a warning. It sounded like an instruction written after too many failed attempts. Behind me, in the real room, footsteps crossed the hallway above me. The steps were slow. They did not come toward me from the corridor. They crossed the ceiling, as if someone was walking upside down on the floor above. Dust shook from the plaster in careful little bursts. I could hear leather soles, a pause, leather soles again. Then the mirror changed. It no longer reflected the room behind me. It showed St. Anselm's annex, as it must have looked years earlier, brighter, cleaner, full of people who had all turned at the same moment to stare at the doorway I was standing in. None of them had faces. They had smooth, pale ovals angled toward me. I do not remember deciding to run. I remember the shelf edge tearing my coat. I remember the wet object in my hand. I remember the corridor twisting the wrong way, and the building becoming suddenly too large for its own walls. At one point, I passed reception and saw the logbook open on the desk. Under my last entry, in handwriting that was not mine, someone had added, "Witness arrived. Witness incomplete." There was a square of space below it for a signature. The pen lay beside the line, uncapped, waiting. I kept moving because stopping felt like agreement. The alarm panel did not accept the exit code. The main doors opened onto darkness that was not outside. The window beside reception showed not the street, but the sealed room and the mirror inside it, getting closer each time I looked. I tried the staff entrance last. That was when the latch lifted by itself. It was a tiny sound, almost courteous. The door loosened under my palm. Rain came through the gap with such ordinary force that I nearly cried. I stumbled out into the yard, over the bins, through a hedge, and did not stop until I reached the petrol station on the main road. The police came because the attendant called them. I told the first version badly: intruder, panic, locked door, old room. I left out the mirror. I left out the photographs. I left out the part where my reflection had no head, because saying it aloud would have made the room real again. They found no intruder. They found no corridor behind the storeroom. He was too quick with every answer. 3 days later, a padded envelope arrived at my flat with no postmark. Inside was the cracked wristband with my date of birth on it. It was dry, clean, and labeled in the same careful hand as the bags on the shelf. The label did not have my name. It had tomorrow's date. I took it to the sink, meaning to throw it away, and saw my reflection in the kitchen window. For one clean second, I had no face in the glass, only a pale oval turned toward the dark room behind me. Then it came back. Since then, I do not work nights, and I do not stand in front of mirrors after midnight. That sounds superstitious until you have seen a room learning how to remember you. I tried to look up Sister Lydia Rowe years later. The name appears once, in a council archive scan, attached to a missing person note that was never resolved. The address on the note is wrong by modern maps. It points to the back wall of St. Anselm's annex, exactly where the storeroom should be. The final line says the person was last seen carrying a folded sheet from bed 7. I have never told anyone that detail, because when I read it, I felt the weight of that same object in my hand again, wet and patient and impossible. I closed the laptop and heard a floorboard settle above me, though my flat has no upstairs. What frightens me now is not the room itself. It is the idea that some places do not wait empty. They collect ordinary witnesses, sensible people with jobs and keys and excuses, and they use them like signatures. They make a record out of you. They do not need you dead. They only need you to see enough that part of you remains filed away. If you ever find a door that is not on the plan, with a name written in fresh pencil, do not open it to prove you are brave. Leave. Let the place remain undocumented. Let someone else wonder why the wall sounds hollow. The wristband tightened around my wrist one night, although the plastic clasp had been cut through. That is the part I cannot explain away. Not the mirror, not the cold, not the voice from the box. That small practical detail has outlived all my attempts to be rational. It means something in that building knew the shape of my life before I walked in. It had prepared a place for me. It had left a blank line. And sometimes, when the house is quiet and the window is dark enough to reflect the room, I see a nurse with no face standing at the foot of my bed in every dark window. Thanks for listening. Leave the mirrors covered tonight.